You're tuned in to More Living with Jim Brogan, broadcast live from the Brogan Financial Studios at News Talk 98.7, where old-fashioned values, expert knowledge, and genuine understanding come together to give you the retirement straight talk you deserve. Jim's a former National Advisor of the Year recipient and a financial educator, and he's here today to talk about how you can live out the best years of your life. Jim and the Brogan Financial team have been helping retirees and pre-retirees across the Southeast for over 20 years in their pursuit of financial independence. You can reach them during the week at 865-862-6800. So sit back, relax, and get ready to learn, because More Living with Jim Brogan starts now.
And happy Saturday, East Tennessee, and welcome to More Living with Jim Brogan, where it's all about living the best years of your life your way. You're listening to News Talk 98.7 WOKI on this July 4th weekend. I hope you had a great time on Thursday. I know I did, cooking out and doing all kind of stuff. One of my very favorite things in the summer, of course, is to head out onto the lake and do some boating. Just love to be on the bay, on the water. We love water sports. My daughter just loves wake surfing, which of course become all the rage in the last probably 5 to 10 years. We're so fortunate here in East Tennessee to live in a place that has waterways really around just about every corner. So whether you enjoy fishing or water sports or just cruising along, our water bodies really offer something for everyone. Now, much of the land and the water around us is managed by the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency. And today, I'm excited to talk about the great outdoors with our guest, Matt Cameron. Matt is the Outreach and Education Coordinator for Region 4 of the TWRA. Good morning, Matt. Welcome to More Living.
Good morning, Jim. Thanks for having me on this morning.
Yeah, it's great to have you with us. Talk a little bit about your journey. You're now doing outreach and education. You started off as a warden?
I did.
So talk a little bit about how you got into TWRA and what your path looked like and why you're so passionate about it.
Yes, sir. Raised by a father who sincerely loves the outdoors, a great hunter and a great angler, and saw my first game warden, which is what we used to be called, and a lot of people still call us that. We're actually wildlife officers now, but Wayne Rich was the game warden in Jefferson County where I grew up, and I saw him when I was a young kid, and Wayne's a big man, and I was just a wee man, and saw him at the boat ramp and thought, what's this guy doing? And, my dad said, well, he's going to check our fishing license and make sure we've got our safety equipment, our boat, and that we're doing everything by the rules. And I was like, that looks like a cool job. That's what I want to do. And so in 2003, I graduated from UTK and got hired as the Knox County boating enforcement officer right here in downtown. So went to UT. My blood runs orange. And then
I was going to say, now, tell me before we get to the topic, tell me about this Neyland Stadium debacle.
The Neyland,
excuse me.
Yep. And however you want to say it. Yeah, I don't mind.
It's funny because I grew up. I can't believe I just said that because I know it's Neyland, but I grew up and I was taught it was Neyland. And I grew up in Tennessee, East Tennessee. I graduated high school in 1987. So I was taught it was Neyland. Anyway, Neyland Stadium. So what's the Neyland debacle?
So the Neyland Stadium debacle. So I graduated from UT in 2003, and I got hired that summer, hired right out of college, thank God, and started my job, which once again was the Knox County Boating Enforcement Officer. So the Vol Navy, Knox Waterfront, all that was part of my responsibility. So the first fall that I worked, got to go down, get on board a nice Sea Ray patrol boat, and anyway, patrol the Knoxville waterfront. And so we had a pretty good gig, too. We get to go in and watch the football game, stand on the sidelines, with the police. And, I don't think we're really necessary that we be there, but nobody argues. So, anyway, Class A uniform, buttoned up, dressed, in there in the stadium. And it was a Vanderbilt football game. And this one wasn't nationally televised. So this would have been like the fall of 2003. And it's coming up on halftime, and we're standing down by the play clock. And there was a man named Al. We used to help Al keep the media from out in front of the play clock so the players and the officials could see the clock on the field. So we're standing on the sidelines, and I feel somebody put something on my head, and I reach up and feel it, and it's like a Treasure Troll wig. It's blaze orange, just bright as can be. And so it's on my head, and I'm looking around like, what do I do? Do I take it off and be all serious, or do I leave it on? I thought, I just graduated UT. I'm still a fan here, so I'm leaving it on, and people are starting to see me. They're pointing at me and stuff, and used to work out a lot back then, so I'm doing my little Arnold Schwarzenegger poses, and they go get the Jumbotron guy, and they put me on the Jumbotron for 45 seconds, and I'm leading Rocky Top, man. I'm like Peyton Manning, after SEC championship, leading the
Right.
band, right, the Pride of the Southland band. So I'm up there for a while, and it comes and goes, and I'm on cloud nine, and I look around, and the other officers that I'm working with, the senior officers, are just looking at me like, I can't believe you just did that. So I went from cloud nine to crash and burn in an instant. And so my senior officer, Joe Durnan, he's retired now, but he was in Knox County. He comes up and he said, Matt, buddy, it's been nice working with you. And I'm like,
oh my goodness,
Joe, was that bad? He goes, well, it wasn't good. I'll tell you that. He goes,
Oh, no.
Brian has season tickets. That was our supervisor, Brian Ripley. Also lives here in Knoxville. I said, was he here? He's like, well, yeah, he usually sits right up there and he's pointing, and I'm looking for him. Like, is he here? Because I don't know. He said he always calls at halftime and tells us we look good and we make him proud. We'll see what he says. So halftime comes and goes. Joe comes back and says, guess what? I said, what, Joe? He said, Brian didn't call. I said, was that bad or is that good? He said, well, it's not good. I can
Oh,
tell
my
you
goodness.
that. So long story short, man, the next day I had to work the dummy deer detail. We used to put out a robot deer, try to get poachers to shoot it, from the road. So we all meet up in Hancock County. Brian's there, supervisor. We eat breakfast at a little gas station. He doesn't say a word about it. I'm thinking, maybe he didn't see me, trying to play that card. So anyway, comes time to go, and everybody had standard cab trucks back then, no extra cabs. Well, come time to go, Brian says, you ride with me, Cameron. I thought, gosh, here it goes. I've worked my whole life to get this job. I'm about to get fired, in the first 2 or 3 months. So we get in this expedition, sitting there, and he's letting it fester for a while, just like when you got in trouble at school and you wish your dad would just whip you and get it over with. It's one of those kind of things. Well, finally he says, so tell me, what in the blankety blank provoked you to put on a blaze orange wig leading Rocky Top in front of 107,000 volunteer fans? And I'm like, Brian, I won't lie to you. He said, no, you better tell me a good one on this one. I need something good. I was like, I just got caught up in the moment. Went to UT, yada, 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 yada. He said, well, I'll tell you what. He said, I've learned not to discipline when I'm angry. He said, I didn't see you at first. He said, but the guy next to me patted me on the leg and said, hey, Rip, is that one of yours up there? He said, yep, that's one of mine. So anyway, he said, as long as your face doesn't end up on the cover of Volunteer Pride magazine next fall and you never pull that again, he said, we'll write it off as youthful exuberance. So I survived that. And now it's kind of like a badge of honor. But
I bet.
So funny.
Yeah, well, a lot of Tennessee fans. I grew up pretty diehard myself. Let's talk about. I want to get into boating, and you just said your first role was boating officer, right? Sure. But before we do, the TWRA manages over 1.5 million acres of land and waterways across 123 wildlife management areas. So talk a little bit about the main things the TWRA does for those areas.
Yeah, so our mission statement is to conserve, preserve, manage, enhance, and protect the fish and wildlife of the state for the benefit of Tennesseans and our visitors. And we also foster a safe use of our water through boating enforcement. So we're kind of like a Department of Natural Resources in a lot of other states. Some states, they divide the hunting and the fishing and the boating up into separate divisions, but we kind of do it all here. So yeah, we're just trying to keep wildlife levels manageable and sustainable so that we can hunt certain species and other species we don't hunt. And a lot of people might find it surprising to learn that we have about 1,400 different species of wildlife in the state. You can only hunt about 100 of those. So by and large, we manage non-game animals that are protected, things we enjoy just looking at, the watchable wildlife, as well as the things that we hunt for. So we're responsible for pretty much all the wildlife and fish in the state.
That's fantastic. And now then, what is your responsibility in terms of overseeing boating safety and things like that out on the lake?
We are the boating police, to put it quite simply. Get called water Nazis and all sorts of other things, but trust me, we are out there to try to make sure people go home safely at the end of the day. And sometimes we have to issue citations. Sometimes we have to make arrests. But, the fact is that we lose about 22 people in Tennessee boating accidents every year, and we just had number 11 yesterday. So we're halfway to that average. It's not a number that we strive to meet, of course, but that's what we're out there to do, just make sure you have a safe and enjoyable time. So
when we talk about boating education, I was born in 1969, so I'm grandfathered in. I didn't have to get a boating license, right? And then when did that change? If you're born when, or who, like my daughter had, my daughters, they both have boating licenses, but I didn't have to get one. When did that change? So in 2005, we passed a law that says if you're born after January 1st, 1989, you have to pass the boating safety course. So that's 34, 35-year-old. But what about all those other people I mean, I just, when I'm out on the lake, there's so many people out there that just don't understand basic boating rules. I mean, do you wish that, I mean, sometimes, like, I've always been glad I was grandfathered in. You know, and I grew up on the lake in South Knoxville, so I grew up driving my dad's runabout, you know, an inboard, outboard. Now I've got a wake boat. But I almost feel like I wish everybody did have to get a license and do some something.
I agree with you. If you've got the money and you're born before January 1st of 89, you can go out and buy a 60-foot yacht or a 20-foot bass boat that'll run 90 mile an hour, or a jet ski that'll run 70 from the factory, jump on it and go without any prior knowledge or training or skills. So I agree with you. I guess when they wrote the law, there had to be a cutoff point from this point forward. So what we did see, though, not long after we implemented that law, is that the younger generation of boaters do have more general boating knowledge than a lot of the older generation, because we were talking earlier about, you know, the right-of-way out there and who's to stand on and the give-way vessel. You know, a lot of boaters have no idea what that means. They just think boats are going any and every direction at any time. You can change your course and do whatever, and that creates a lot of dangerous crossing situations. And we do have, you know, boating accidents involved, collisions out there with other boats and with fixed objects. So the younger generation does have, at least I think, a better basic knowledge of boating, and hopefully they can build on that with skills in the future. We're
visiting with Matt Cameron. He's with TWRA. We're talking about the great outdoors. When we come back, I want to talk about some of those base boating rules that maybe you're not aware of, or maybe need to be reinforced. Because, as he said, it's been 11 deaths so far this year out on the water. We definitely need to get better education out there on boating rules and boating safety. So stay with us. We'll have a little hunting and fishing later in the show as you listen to More Living with Jim Brogan right here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
Welcome back to News Talk 98.7's Brogan Financial Studios, where Jim Brogan is coming to you live with important news and advice to help you achieve your dream retirement. Get ready to learn and live. Here's your host, Jim Brogan.
Welcome back to More Living here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI. This is News. I apologize. I'm Jim Brogan. We're visiting with Matt Cameron. I got completely tongue-tied there, Matt. Let's talk about some basic boating rules, because I just don't think a lot of, you mentioned before the break, even right-of-way core concepts. So tell our listeners, talk a little bit about right-of-way on the lake.
It's kind of a foreign term to a lot of folks, but there are what's called stand-on and give-way vessels out there, which means that if two boats are approaching one another, there are certain actions that each boater needs to take in order to pass one another safely. So once again, we don't have lanes of traffic to operate in, don't have traffic signals, stop signs, brake lights, turn signals, any of that stuff. So it does create an inherently dangerous environment just because of that. But pretty much when two boats meet one another, one is stand on or one is give way. And what that means is one will hold its course and speed, and the other one should take action to turn or avoid getting into a collision. So the easiest way I guess I could explain it would be like at a stop sign. If you have a four-way stop and two cars get there at the same time, you know which car has the right-of-way.
The one on the right, isn't it?
Correct. So on the lake, it would be the same type situation. So if we're traveling up the lake and a boat is approaching from our right-hand side and we're going to cross paths, we would slow down and give way and let that other boat pass if it's on our right-hand side. The opposite would be is if we're coming up the lake and a boat is approaching on our left side, it should slow down and give us the right-of-way to pass in front of it. But what we find out is most people don't know that, and you can never assume that that other boat knows what you're going to do. So if there's any confusion, stop, slow down, do whatever you got to do to avoid.
Yeah, I've always found I want to, if we're kind of on a similar path, I want to quickly point my bow in a certain direction just to let them know, hey, I'm going to go this way.
This is my intention. And you're talking about that.
I'm wanting to declare my intention to that boater. Or if they start doing it, I'll just do the opposite, obviously. Sure.
Yeah, and that's one of those things where you need awareness in all directions when you're on the water. On the road, we're primarily worried about what's in front of us or maybe to the sides, but you
got to be aware all around. When I was teaching my youngest daughter to jet ski, she would drive and I'd be on the back, And I'd have her slow down, and then I'd have her come to a stop, and then I'd cover her eyes and say, "Tell me what's around us. How many boats are on the lake?" And she'd always get it right, because I wanted her to always be aware of what was going on around. Now, when it comes to jet skis, I guess a lot of these accidents are jet skis, is what I hear. So talk about some of the danger with jet skis and what you see people doing, getting kind of crazy. Some jet skis come way too close to boats. So what are the rules there?
So personal watercraft or jet skis, to put it slangily, I guess, there are different rules that apply only to them that don't apply to regular boats. One being you can't operate them at night. Can't put lights on them and run them at night. We've seen that. People put them on there to think they can run them at night, but they're just so fast and so maneuverable. We have so many accidents in daytime hours. I can't imagine how high that would go up if we let them operate at night. So you can't do it at night, period. So sunset, you got to get them off the water. Secondly, you do have to wear the kill switch, the safety lanyard. So if you fall off of that thing, which you will at some point, it kills the power to it, so you can get back on it. And then everyone on board a personal watercraft has to wear their life jacket at all times. We encourage that in boats as well, but it's not the law unless you're 12 years old or younger in a boat that you have to have a life jacket on. So the other thing about jet skis is they love to jump wakes.
Right.
You with a big wakeboard boat, you're probably like a magnet.
Yeah, they like when we're wake surfing because of the wakes creates.
And I get that. That's kind of what those things are made for. And there's nothing wrong with jumping wakes out there, but you do have to stay at least 100 feet behind another boat if you're going to jump the immediate wake of it. But those nice big rollers come off right on the back right there, and they like to get right up behind your boat and jump that first nice big wave, and that's illegal. You do have to stay 100 feet back. And the reason for that is the closer I get to a boat and I'm going to jump away behind it, I can't see boats that are passing, could be on either side of that boat, and we have seen jet skis jump the wake and end up in the path of another boat and get ran over. So
oh goodness,
operate those with extreme caution.
Now, when you do water sports, whether it's kind of funny. We were out yesterday on the lake, and we saw a water skier. And we very rarely see skiers anymore. It's mostly wake surfing. You see a little bit of waterboarding or wakeboarding, excuse me, waterboarding, yeah. And then the skiing. But it's unbelievable to me how sometimes we'll be pulling a wake surfer and how close people will get right behind us, following us. So talk a little bit about. I mean, people should have common sense, because if somebody wake surfing falls, or a water skier, and they're too close, it could be very, very dangerous. So what are some guidelines people need to follow, or rules?
Yeah. So if you are going to engage in that activity, for one thing, everyone has to have a personal flotation device on, and I'm sure you know that. So your passenger has to wear their life jacket. If you're pulling a tube or a skier or wakeboard or whatever, that person has to have a life jacket on, and you would think that would be a no-brainer, but we still see people doing that without life jackets on. So we're going to write that ticket every time. But being aware of that activity wherever you're boating, there are certain areas, it seems to me, like when I was a field officer, that where you did these activities at. There were certain coves and parts of the lake where people seemed to tube and wakeboard and so forth. So identify those, know where they're at, and just be aware of the likelihood that somebody is going to fall off of one of those devices at some point. And it's not like a car, you stop immediately, back up and pick them up. You've got to make a great big wide turn and get back to that person. They're going to be, several hundred feet away from you in the water, exposed at some point. So I really encourage. That's
where it can really get scary when you're driving the boat and a kid falls. I say a kid, could be an adult too, but I mean, one time we were pulling tubers, and we had two different tubers on, and they fell off opposite directions.
Uh-oh.
And there was a boat coming that wasn't paying attention, almost hit one of the tubers. Mm-hmm. And they just weren't paying attention.
They're not looking for that. It's kind of like on the road. We're not looking for bicyclists, for example. Rarely are we thinking about motorcycles, something smaller. But in the water, if a person falls off, your head is about the only thing that's above the water.
Yeah, you really want to put your hands up in the air, right?
Absolutely. Wear a brightly colored life jacket, hands up. If you have your wakeboard or skis, hold those up. Make yourself look big, almost like what we do to scare a bear away. Hopefully there's good visibility there, but people just aren't paying attention like they should on the lake.
Where do you see the most common accidents? Like, what's the most common cause?
So we've had 11 so far this year, and every one of them involved a fall overboard and a person not wearing a life jacket, and they drowned. I mean, it's that simple. We don't have a lot of collision-type accidents out there, which amazes me considering, 250,000 registered boats in Tennessee. 4th of July weekend and all that. We just don't see a lot of collisions, thankfully. But, yeah, most people who die in a boating accident drown, and most people who drown aren't wearing their life jacket. So it's just that simple.
And they just get thrown off.
Get thrown off or fall overboard like the man on Watts Bar 2 days ago at Tennessee National Marina, 75-year-old man, Mr. Frost. He was attempting to dock his boat, and somehow he fell overboard. I don't know if he was reaching for the cleat, trying to tie it off or what happened, but he fell in right there at the dock, and he never came back up.
I wonder if he hit his head, knocked him out or something.
Good possibility. And then another 75-year-old man on the Hiwassee River where it comes into the Tennessee, I guess toward Watts Bar as well, yesterday morning. They were fishing. The guy in the front of the boat heard a splash, turns around, his partner has fallen overboard, and it looked like he's having a medical emergency. Didn't have a life jacket on. He jumps in. Fortunately, he's able to get to him, but it was too late. That man ended up drowning as well. So, accidents happen, medical emergencies happen, but keeping your body above water, keeping your head above water is, the most important thing out there. So just wearing that life jacket really is the difference in life and death.
Now, a lot of people love to, swim in the lake or enjoy non-motorized lake activities, kayaking, paddleboarding. So what are some and I used to do these 5K swims every year, and I would prepare some in the lake out on the main channel, and I had this, I'd always do it when there's hardly any boating traffic out, but I'd have this thing tied behind me that's a little, orange floaty that, pretty, but what are some ways that those enjoying non-motorized lake activities can stay safe?
I'm glad you brought that up. Man, I did long-distance triathlon for years, did the Ironman, and this is crazy, dude. I would get out in the morning by myself and swim 2 miles in the freaking lake. As a TWRA boating enforcement officer, I try to hug the shoreline, but I got to where I was getting careless. I'd swim across the cove instead of hugging the shoreline, 10, 15 feet. I was getting to where I was swimming straight across, and I was having boats pass me on the inside. So it's a wonder I'm sitting here today. So not to beat that to death, but we do see a number of swimming incidents that aren't necessarily boating related, and there are probably more drownings that occur that way than they are from actual boats. So I just can't stress enough that if you're going to swim in the water, if you're not going to wear that life jacket, take it out there with you. Sit on it. Everybody's probably put their legs through one at some point and sat on it. It does help you float out there, or just keep it by your side because, people cramp up. I have seen a lot of accidents happen where someone got into the water from a boat to swim. Here comes the wind, especially with a pontoon boat. They're so flat on the sides. The wind will push that boat away from them, and they can't swim fast enough, to get back on board. So anchor your boat down. Take a life jacket out there with you if you're not going to wear it, and don't try to swim across a cove. People say, well, that's not that far. I'm going to take off swimming. They get halfway there, and they get exhausted. They can't get back. They can't get to the other side, and they go down. So the water's just so unforgiving.
Now, what about, kayaking, paddleboarding? What about those types of things?
We've seen an explosion of paddle sports, especially since COVID. Those things are cheap, relatively speaking. So people are picking up the canoes and the kayaks and the paddle boards and hitting the water. But what a lot of folks don't know is that you do have to have your life jacket on board those craft as well. So just because they're paddle craft, you still have to have a life jacket. You don't have to wear it unless you're 12 or younger, but we see people turn those canoes and kayaks over. They go fishing in them. They flip them. They can't get back in it. And I think we had 5 paddlecraft-related boating fatalities last year. So it all goes back once again to wearing that personal flotation device.
And I guess if one thing that always kind of humors me, well, that doesn't really humor me, but people be paddleboarding and they're in the main channel and then they get mad if you drive by. I mean, if you're doing something in the main channel, if you don't want big waves, you probably shouldn't be out in the main channel.
I would agree with you.
You ought to be in a cove somewhere.
Sure. Yeah, I don't recommend that, especially on these busy weekends.
Yes, busy weekends.
Middle of the week or something, that's one thing. But I expect some sort of wake turbulence out there on these busy holidays.
We're visiting with Matt Cameron. He's with TWRA, and when we come back, we're going to get into hunting and fishing. We'll also have our dollars and cents segment. What is the most overlooked area in estate planning? We'll have that when we come back. You're listening to More Living with Jim Brogan here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
Welcome back to News Talk 98.7's Brogan Financial Studios, where Jim Brogan is coming to you live with important news and advice to help you achieve your dream retirement. Get ready to learn and live. Here's your host, Jim Brogan.
This is More Living with Jim Brogan, where it's all about living the best years of your life your way. We're visiting with Matt Cameron. He is the Outreach and Education Coordinator for Region 4 of the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency. We've been talking about boating safety. We're going to have a little bit more about boating safety. We're also going to pivot into hunting and fishing. However, before we do get back to Matt, it is time for Dollars and Cents.
Want to be sure you are getting the most out of your retirement? For all the years of your retirement? That's the primary goal of More Living with Jim Brogan and our Dollars and Cents segment, where we provide you with an important financial tip that will help positively impact the quality of your life in retirement. And now, here's Jim with this week's Dollars and Cents tip.
What is the most overlooked area in estate planning today? In my view, it is coordinating your beneficiary designations with your legal documents, and especially dealing with your retirement accounts, IRAs, 401ks, 403bs, that whole alphabet soup of retirement accounts. It's just critical to understand how your assets pass when you pass away. You know, your will does not cover everything. Anything, you know, there's three main realities of how assets transfer at death. One is you jointly own something. You know, my wife and I jointly own our house. So if I die, she automatically owns the house. There's no probate. She doesn't have to file a will. She doesn't have to do anything in order to get the house because her name's on it. Now, when I name a beneficiary on an account, then that beneficiary designation overrides anything in the will. So the beneficiary designation governs everything. And I can't tell you how often we have people come into our office and they've spent time and money on their legal documents, on their wills. Maybe they have a living trust, but they've spent this time and money, and they haven't really even thought about their beneficiary designations. And do those things match? Do they work in tandem together? If you have monies going into a trust at your death, that can create a lot of complications for retirement accounts. Because remember, your IRAs, your 401ks, you haven't paid income tax on most, if not all of that money. And so it creates tax complications at death. You're kind of leaving your kids a tax time bomb. And leaving it in trust can be more challenging than leaving it outright, but there can be reasons to leave your money to trust because you need it for control or maybe other kinds of things. So it just has to be carefully planned, especially for retirement accounts, to understand that the beneficiary designation supersedes the will. And so all those things need to be planned together. And it is in my view, the most overlooked area in estate planning today.
That's our Dollars and Cents segment for this week. You can find this week's Dollars and Cents segment and others by visiting BroganFinancial.com.
Check us out online. Go to BroganFinancial.com. You can click on resources. We've got a lot of guides. One of our guides on the resources page is a guide to naming beneficiaries for your retirement accounts. And it's 4 pages. It's a 4-page long guide with checklists and questions to ask. It's a lot more complex than just filling out a simple form. So check out all our resources. You can also check out our podcasts of all of our shows at BroganFinancial.com. Click on radio, or you can download through Spotify or Apple Podcast. We're visiting this morning with Matt Cameron. We're talking about the great outdoors. He's with Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency. We've been talking about boating safety. And before we leave boating, let's talk about boating under the influence. What are the rules? You know, you can have an open container in your boat. You cannot in a car, right? So what are the rules with boating?
We'll start off with open container. And this one bothers me about boats, but a boat operator can legally consume alcohol and operate the boat at the same time. They just can't be under the influence of alcohol. So I think we're setting them up for failure to begin with by allowing them to do that. But that's what the law allows. And
how's that defined under the influence? Is it the same as a DUI in terms of blood alcohol levels?
It would be. There's a per se limit, which would be 0.08, just like it is on the highway in a motor vehicle. So that's the same on the water. But just because we pull up and that person is consuming alcohol doesn't mean they are necessarily under the influence. So we have to start building a case there, if we suspect that there is impairment, we have to, we look at the before we stop the boat. Were they operating in a reckless manner? Was there some reason they drew attention to us upon approach, the first contact with an operator? Does he have slurred speech? Does he have bloodshot, watery eyes, strong odor of alcohol? Is he stumbling around the boat, which, boats are fluid out there, so
yes,
pay attention to that stuff too. Is he having confusion with the things we asked him to do? Can you get me your fire extinguisher, 4 wearable life jackets, and your registration? Impaired people have trouble with divided attention tasks. So if we see signs of impairment, then we'll go ahead and get that individual to put a life jacket on and get into our boat, and we'll administer field sobriety tasks in the boat. And we do make arrests. I think we've made about 90 BUI arrests this year across the state of Tennessee. We probably average pushing 180 or 200 arrests every year, and it's the same thing as driving under the influence in a car, except you're in a boat, and it can have just as fatal of consequences.
So the first thing y'all are doing is really just observing, and does this person appear to be under the influence?
Sure.
Yeah. Is it? Do you think it's a much bigger problem than maybe we realize? When you see some of the crazy boating things that happen out there, a lot of times it's in the late afternoon, early evening. How much do you think alcohol contributes to a lot of our accidents and boating problems?
That's a great question. I can tell you that nationally, alcohol is the leading contributing factor to fatal boating accidents. In Tennessee, I don't think our numbers would reflect that completely, but it certainly is a leading contributing factor. So, that person may have drowned, but what caused them to end up in the water to begin with? Was it alcohol impairment? The operator was driving recklessly and threw someone out of the boat, or what have you? But it is certainly a problem. One big case that comes to mind is last summer when a man named Norman Joe Sturgill, was operating on Norris Lake in a bass boat, ran over another boat that had, I think, 13 people on board, and he ramped completely over this boat through the wakeboard tower and killed Connor Catlett, a 12-year-old young man from right here in Knoxville. So, Mr. Sturgill was convicted. He's got to do 8 years, which doesn't sound like much in compared to the life of a child, but he has to do 8 years at 100%. And he's got to think about every day of his life that he made the poor decision to be impaired and operate a boat that resulted in the death of a child. So I think his BAC was twice the legal.
Yeah, that's scary.
When that happened.
Before the last question on boating, let's talk about night boating. I'm amazed at how many fishing boats go flying across the water when it's completely dark outside. So talk a little bit about night boating and common sense and rules. And do you have to have a spotlight? I mean, a spotlight really is for the boater to identify debris in the water. So talk to us about night boating.
Yeah, it creates a whole different scenario out there for the obvious reasons. You can't see, everything that's going on around you. And we put navigation lights on our boats, not so that we can see our surroundings, but so other boats can see us. You have the red and green side lights, and then your all-round white light. Doesn't really give you any visibility of what else is out there, but that's why they're so important that those are functioning and operable, so other boats see you and you don't get ran over out there. Spotlight. It's fine to use some sort of spotlight to look in the water. Is there any debris in the water? Are there buoys? Are there other boats that maybe aren't lit up, the shoreline or whatever? To use that intermittently, but keeping that light on all the time is prohibited by law, actually, because it blinds other boats.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've actually found if you let your eyes adjust, you actually can see better without using a spotlight.
You can. That's a good point, too. God gave us the stars in the heavens to give us a little bit of light at night, and you can see reflection on the water. And once your eyes do adjust, you can see pretty well. But sometimes it gets hard to see the lights on a boat and the lights on the shoreline kind of blend in, and depth perception is often really lowered at night. So here's what's crazy, though. There's no speed limit on the water, unfortunately, but that is conditional as well. If a boat is operating too fast in a congested area or maybe at night in a manner that is reckless or negligent, we can issue citations for that. So that's kind of how we handle those speeding type scenarios.
Okay, that's great information. Let's talk a little bit about let's talk about fishing. We're on the water. What are the rules that we have in our area here, Matt, in terms of fishing, licensing? Are there limitations on what we can catch? Talk a little bit about some of the rules. Yeah,
Tennessee is one of the top destinations to fish in the United States for the obvious reasons that we have so much water here and such a diverse topography going from west to east. You got the mountains and then the valley and then the plateau, and then you got the Nashville Basin, then you got the coastal plain in West Tennessee. So we have over 300 species of fish, which is the most of any inland state that doesn't touch the ocean in the country. We're very proud of our fishing here. So you are allowed to fish for sport fish. Our fishing guide lists those out, the species that you are allowed to catch and keep, and we do have creel limits and size limits on those because, we've seen what people will do ungoverned in history. We have wiped out different species of animals. I'll probably get over into hunting when I start talking about more of this, but, if you don't have limits put on a certain species like crappie, for example, really delicious, great table fare, fun to catch. Douglas Lake back in the 80s, there was no creel limit or size limit on them, and you could catch crappie by the hundreds. And it got to the point where people would catch the little ones and just throw them on the bank and let them die. There was just that many of them. They got tired of catching them. So now we're seeing the decline in the fishery out there. If we had put that regulation in place, 20 years before we did, we probably would still have a really, really good crappie fishery there. But the crappie fishing on Douglas, for example, has suffered a bit to the point where we haven't had to stock crappie there in the past, and we're probably going to do that moving forward just because there's a lot of pressure on them.
And you're really, TWRA works hard at balancing. I mean, some species you want to control the growth of that species, and then some you want to promote the growth, right? So you're constantly balancing all that.
Yeah, that's a good point as well, Jim. There are invasive species of fish that have moved in, particularly in the West Tennessee and the Middle Tennessee now, the Asian carp. I guess you call them ponds and things, and they got into the Mississippi River. They do spawn in the Mississippi River, and then they come upstream into our waterways, and they compete with the resources for our native sport fish. They look a lot like a shad that most people would be familiar with, except they keep growing and growing and growing. They get huge. The silver carp, the ones that jump up out of the water, you've probably seen those. Create a dangerous situation for boaters, recreational boaters like you guys out there trying to wake surf on Kentucky Lake, for example. Those things, when they hear a boat motor coming, I don't know what it does, but it triggers them to jump, and the people are actually getting injured by these things. So we'd have to manage fish in a way that would try to eliminate these invasive species and reduce their impact on our native fish populations because, once again, they're competing for the same resources.
Now, you mentioned hunting, so we definitely want to get into hunting as well. People in the South, of course, so many Southerners love to hunt. So stay with us. We're visiting with Matt Cameron with TWRA. You're listening to More Living with Jim Brogan on News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
Welcome back to News Talk 98.7's Brogan Financial Studios, where Jim Brogan is coming to you live with important news and advice to help you achieve your dream retirement. Get ready to learn and live. Here's your host, Jim Brogan.
Welcome back to More Living here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI. I'm Jim Brogan. We're visiting with Matt Cameron. He is the Outreach and Education Coordinator for Region 4 of the TWRA. TWRA, the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency. Let's dive into hunting. Let's talk about kind of some peculiar things about hunting. First off, can you hunt your own on your own property, or do you need to go somewhere and get a license?
A great question. 90% of the land in Tennessee is privately owned, and so as a landowner, you can hunt on your own property. If it's considered farmland, then you're exempted from having a license. You and your children and your resident grandchildren, I believe, under the age of 16, can hunt your property without having to purchase a hunting license. So if you're not one of those 90% or people that own 90% of the private land in Tennessee and you have to hunt public lands, we do have wildlife management areas and opportunities for you to go there.
What are some of the deadlines coming up? You mentioned, we mentioned off air, the big game quota hunt application. Can you talk about deadlines or windows that people need to be aware of?
So, yes, we do have what are called quota hunts and non-quota hunts. And as a kid, I really didn't understand that or really worry about what that meant. But what a quota hunt is that there are certain wildlife management areas that we only allow a certain number of hunters to be there and to take a certain number of, deer or turkey, for example. And then there are other wildlife management areas where you can just go the same as a statewide season. So whenever it's open, you can just go there and hunt. You don't need an additional quota hunt permit. So the quota hunt permit application period is open right now. I think it's through July 24th, if I'm not mistaken. I'll look that up while we're talking. But you can go online and apply. Is probably the easiest way to do it at tnwildlife.org. Click on the quota hunts page, and it will kind of guide you through the process. And I think there are 60 different quota hunt permits that are being offered. You can apply for up to 15 of them, and hopefully you'll get drawn for one. And we do have a priority point system now. Let's say you apply this year and you don't get drawn for the hunt you want to go on, you'll get a priority point that'll be applied for next year, and so forth, and to the point where hopefully you'll have a better chance at getting drawn for one.
Let's talk about weapons you can or cannot use when you're hunting.
That's a good question. Something I don't give a lot of thought to. Just, I guess I've done it my whole life. I don't really think about these things much, but we do have, we'll talk deer, because, deer is the probably the top game species that we have that people go after. So, for deer hunting, for example, we have 3 different seasons set up for the type of hunting implements you're going to use. And it starts with the archery season, which will begin in September. So the bow hunters get the first opportunity to hunt deer. The limits are a lot higher during that period because most people aren't really successful with archery, because you have to be a much better hunter to get them close to you to get that shot and then to make a good effective kill shot. So following the archery hunting season, we have a muzzleloading hunting season. It's usually in October, a great time to hunt just because of the rut. It's starting to kick in, and deer are really active during that period. And then the final hunting season we have for deer would be the rifle, the gun hunting season, if you want to call it that. And it's usually in November. It starts right after, I think, the Saturday before Thanksgiving, and then it runs through December and early January.
Now talk about small games, rabbit, squirrel, raccoon, coyote. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's good. People don't small game hunt as much as they used to. Like my dad's generation, for example, they didn't have deer and turkey to hunt, back in the 50s and the 60s. People had wiped them out. And, we can talk about all that if we have time, but they hunted small game primarily. They hunted quail and rabbit and squirrels and raccoons, and because that's all they had to hunt. They didn't have turkey or deer to hunt back then, and that's kind of flip-flop now. Most people hunt big game species, and they don't hunt the small game anymore. But one of the funnest way to get started in hunting is to hunt small game animals, and squirrel hunting is probably should be the gateway to getting someone involved in hunting, because we don't have to worry about wind direction with deer. It's usually warmer. We can talk and walk and make noise and just have a good time.
That's great. Great word there. I got to ask this. Seems like we've never seen a time when we've seen so many bears strolling through populated areas. We've had them at our new office location out off of North Shore Drive. I mentioned to you off air, we had last year one running down the road in our subdivision. What should people do when they see bears?
Don't approach them. Don't try to get your selfie. Don't feed them, for crying out loud, because the ones that we're seeing in Gatlinburg, and I'm not throwing any shade on Gatlinburg, there's just so many people and restaurants and bears in that area that come in contact with one another that bears are getting food conditioned, habituated to human foods. People are intentionally feeding them up there. They're finding access to garbage.
Defies common sense.
It blows my mind. And what's sad is that the bear suffers because that. You think you're doing it good by trying to feed it something. You are killing that bear. When you start feeding it human foods like that, it ends up in the death of that bear from having to be trapped and humanely killed.
Matt, talk to us about the Tennessee Conservation Raffle that's currently underway.
So the Conservation Raffle, it began several years ago. I don't know what year we're in now, but we have just some crazy good prize packages. It's too good not to mention. So all the money that's raised by it goes back into wildlife management and conservation. But right now you can buy one ticket for $20, 3 for $50, or 10 for $100. And here are some of the prizes I'll throw out there real quick. There's an $80,000 Camus bass boat, a CX-19 bass boat, an Oliver travel trailer. It's valued at $90,000. A voucher, a $50,000 voucher towards a Ford vehicle of your choice. A nice side-by-side from Bass Pro Shops and Travel.
Where can we buy a raffle ticket?
Yeah, wow, that's great question. WildliferAffle.com.
WildliferAffle.com. Well, thank you so much for that. I'm going to go home and I'm going to do that right away. This is Matt Cameron with Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency. Thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedule.
Hey, the pleasure's all mine. Thank you, Jim.
Absolutely. We've learned a lot about the great outdoors, because a greater outdoors provides for more living, so you can live the best years of your life your way. Many thanks to Wayne for engineering the show. Thank you to Jill for helping produce the show. Check us out online, BroganFinancial.com. Have a great weekend. You've been listening to More Living with Jim Brogan here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
The views expressed by Jim Brogan and his guests are not that of Cumulus Media. Any discussion of financial, legal, and tax planning strategies is not intended to be individualized advice and is general in nature. Always consult with your advisor for advice specific to your needs. This program's content does not represent a recommendation of any particular security, strategy, or investment by Jim Brogan or Brogan Financial Incorporated.